Well, good evening and welcome to the live stream here on the 24th of June, 2025. It's Martin North here from Digital Finance Analytics. Great to have you on this evening. Thank you very much for spending some time with us. Hope you're all well. And we're going to have a really important conversation this evening. It's probably one of the most important conversations, property related, that I've had all year. And I'll explain why in a second. Just before I bring Veronica in, I will remind you that we don't provide specific advice. This is a general conversation only. If you need specific advice, there are channels to get that, but this is a general conversation. But nevertheless, we will be able to touch on some rather important issues. If you'd like to ask a question, you can. If you use that Walk the World, you can send that directly to me via the chat, and I'll see the question and we can get it in the show. And I've also enabled Super Chat, which means if you'd like to get your question to the top of the list, you can do that, or indeed make a contribution to what we do around here. We always appreciate those who help us financially. We don't do this for profit. We do this because we think there's a really, really important conversation to be had. And your support makes the difference between being able to continue and not continue doing this stuff. So we really appreciate all those who help us, or via Patreon or other means. Right, let me bring Veronica straight in. Veronica, welcome back. Lovely to see you again.
Oh, hello. We know the answer is 42, but what is the question?
Well, that is indeed the question. And the mystery question tonight is buyer's agents. Do we really need them? And what do they do? This is a biggie. And the reason I wanted to talk about this was because I've had a few experiences through my one-to-one conversations in recent weeks. And I've been fascinated by the pantheon of experiences that people have had. Some have had really good experiences, others have disastrous experiences. So I thought we should explore that. Just before we get into buyer's agents, though, just give everybody the sort of the 2-minute whistle stop tour, because I can never give you the full force. You got so many irons in so many pies. So just go for it, Veronica.
Well, I have never been diagnosed with ADHD, but maybe I have it. So basically, I'm a real estate agent my big mission is to help people make good property decisions. And to do so, I've created a number of businesses and services to help that. And where Good Deeds Property Buyers is my sort of original business, which is a buyer's agency. And obviously, I'll be talking a lot about buyer's agents tonight. We also do vendor advocacy across the whole country. And I've got a property management business. I've written a book called Auction Ready. I've hosted a couple of podcasts, and I've run out of things to talk about. I've got a buyer's agent mentoring program and a program for first home buyers. And I need to have a drink because I'm about to cough.
Well, let me come back in and of course you also made some TV shows and other bits and pieces in the past too. So you've been around, and have a drink and get yourself ready. I was actually on earlier making a show with one of my other contacts, and halfway through I had a choking fit. So it must be the weather.
On the other side of the world.
Yeah, well, indeed. Now, the really interesting observation, and I'll just sort of relay my 3 quick thumbnail case studies just to sort of get the conversation going, because I've been really interested in the rise of buyer's agents. There are more people advertising it. There's more people you can find them on social media and things like that. So this is an incoming thing rather than a dying thing. Oh, and by the way, I should say, I've actually put a poll up and I've asked people, have you ever used a buyer's agent? Yes, and will again, or yes, never again, or no, but might, or no, and never would again. So we'll see what those results are towards the end. But the point is, this is a thing. And yet, the experience for people that I've spoken with have been very diverse. I had one who actually found a buyer's agent. They'd moved into a new area. They'd moved from Melbourne to Sydney. They needed somebody to help guide them in the area that they were looking. And this particular buyer's agent, who'd been around for quite some time, knew the area really well, took them around, showed them some different places, showed them some options, highlighted where to go, where not to go, got involved in terms of negotiating, and they ended up with a very, very good house in the area that they wanted at a good price. And they said that was fantastic. It really took the pain out of the search, particularly because they didn't know the area. So that was the good story. But then I had 2 bad stories, and one bad story was relating to somebody who was actually from overseas coming to Australia and wanting to buy into the high-rise market, and used a local buyer's agent, and didn't find out that the buyer's agent was actually being paid by the developer. And what that meant was that the developer was feeding certain properties to the buyer's agent, who in turn was feeding those properties to the prospective purchaser. And because they didn't know enough about the area and what else was around, they ended up being locked into a deal with a property that probably wasn't particularly good. But they also later discovered that the buyer's agent was taking a cut from the developer directly, right? And the buyer's agent was paid by the both. They got money two ways, and that can't be right. The third one related to somebody again who was moving, and this time moving up to Brisbane, and was talking to a local estate agent while they were up there. And the local estate agent introduced them to a buyer's agent, and the buyer's agent then sort of took over the search for them because they couldn't get up to Brisbane that frequently. And only later did they discover that the buyer's agent that they actually used was only giving them leads from that particular agency. So they weren't actually giving a whole of market view, they were giving a very filtered view. And so they ended up potentially making a decision without full information. And again, they paid the buyer's agent. The suspicion, we can't prove it. The suspicion is the agent was also passing money across as well. And I guess, to my mind, Veronica, this just highlights it's chaotic out there with regard to buyer's agents. And people might think that this is an easy way to actually go and buy property, but there are really significant bear traps.
There are so many problems with the system at the moment, and I don't even know where to start with those. So one of the issues is that there is no national oversight of buyer's agents. Property legislation in Australia is state-based legislation, or state and territory-based. So you've got 8 different jurisdictions with all different licensing requirements, and also different purchasing processes as well. Different vendor disclosure regimes. There's a whole bunch of things that are very, very different. And you have buyer's agents that are getting licensed in one state and then going and buying in another state without even recognising that there is a difference. Some of them are getting mutual recognition and getting another license, at least in the state that they buy, but many of them don't even realise that they need that. You've got them, all of them are doing a course which is being designed for real estate, so for sales agents and property managers. It has not been designed with buyer's agents in mind. And so it doesn't take into account the fact that you might be buying in a jurisdiction other than where you're studying or getting your license. It doesn't actually cover due diligence at all. And I mean at all. It's not mentioned because, of course, property managers and sales agents don't need to worry about due diligence. And so there's a whole number of things that are not covered in that licensing course or the licensing program, which means that you then have a bunch of people who are getting licensed and in some areas don't need experience to set up a business. And if they're not getting experience from anyone who is experienced, how do they learn this stuff? Like, they learn it with their clients' money. And it's diabolical and it's a real problem. But because the amount of buyer's agents there are is a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of total real estate agents, we've been lumped in with everybody else. And so if anyone tells you there's X amount of buyer's agents in this country, they're lying, because nobody is keeping a record. Yeah. And if anyone's telling you that X percentage of transactions are done with buyer's agents, they're lying too. Because again, nobody is keeping a record. An individual sales agent might be able to say, oh, look, I sold, 10 properties last month and 8 were sold to buyer's agents. They could say that because they're the only ones at a very micro level potentially tracking this stuff. But there is no awareness, and then our regulators have no real understanding of the damage that is being done. I've spoken to insurers who are saying that they pay out a lot of claims against buyer's agents, and none of it gets to court, so none of it hits the public record. So it's all very, very swept under the carpet. But as I said, because best guess is there might be 4,000 buyer's agents in the country, and there's something like, I've got to get my figures right, but I think there's something like 70,000 agents in New South Wales. So if there's 4,000, that's best guessed. I just said anyone tells you that they know how many buyer's agents out there are lying. If there's 4,000 and there's 70,000, licensed agents in New South Wales, then you can see why no one's really caring from a legislative point of view, and the consumers are getting hurt because there is just this lack of oversight and a lack of understanding of what a buyer's agent needs to know and the experience they need to be able to do a good job.
Right. And I would argue that it's often those people who feel less comfortable about buying real estate are more likely, less experienced, are more likely to want to try and find someone to help them. And it's almost as if, the buyer's agent seems to be the yin and the yang, and the real estate agent is trying to help the vendor. So I need somebody on my side to try and help me sort of balance that up and true it up. And they'll know the area, and therefore they can give me good advice, perhaps better advice than I can. And also make the point, it's harder and harder to get really good property data. The property portal data is getting more and more filtered and more squished in terms of the insights that are there. So it's really getting more and more difficult for people to try and find out information themselves. So it tends to steer them towards thinking, maybe there's a magic bullet.
Well, yes, and here's the thing too, is that, you've got all this data. There is a lot of data out there, but people don't know how to evaluate it and understand it and put it into play. But also a lot of buyer's agents are not local specialists. A lot of them, there's sort of two different camps, right? You've got the local specialist and you've got this borderless buyer's agent who'll buy anywhere. Now, they're more dangerous, to be quite frank, because they don't even get out of there behind their desk to inspect properties. The local specialists, it's sort of easier to work out whether they really know their stuff or not. But of course, for a consumer who recognises that they don't know what they're doing and recognises they don't know an area, or they're not familiar with property and they're fearful about that, and it's doubly tragic that they don't know the questions to ask to be able to assess whether or not that buyer's agent really knows what they're doing or not. A lot of them are very good salespeople. They're really great at their pitch. They're really great at telling you what you want to hear. And they're also really great at just, you tell them what you want to buy and they go, yeah, sure, I'll go and find you one of them. What you really need is a trusted advisor, someone who will actually push back a bit and really guide you, because a lot of us come with our preconceptions around what makes a good property, for example, and a lot of people will make mistakes if they aren't, guided by somebody who is equipped and experienced and actually able to guide them. So it's a bit of a minefield.
Absolutely. And the problem, of course, is, and so often with property purchases, you don't do it that often. And therefore, you don't necessarily learn the tricks of the trade, literally the tricks of the trade. So therefore, again, you're leaning on other people. And if in fact the other people are not being straight with you and are not being perhaps able, because they haven't had the experience, or willing because they're being paid through a backhander or something else to do the job properly, you actually end up with a suboptimal outcome, and you end up possibly paying more than you need to, both in terms of the extra payments that you might make to a buyer, but also you might end up in a deal that's going to cost you more as well.
Well, your opportunity costs and also potential to lose money. So obviously, when you've got a buyer's agent that is taking a payment from the developer as well as from their client, that's actually illegal in my understanding in all jurisdictions. So it's definitely illegal in most, if not all, jurisdictions. So that is completely unconscionable. As you know, I also do know that there are kickbacks that are not disclosed all the time that should be disclosed. So if a sales agent is referring a buyer's agent and there is a fee being paid for that referral, then that should be disclosed prior to signing. Well, it depends. Again, it's different in every jurisdiction. If it's New South Wales, for example, that declaration has to be signed before you sign a contract to buy a property, but doesn't have to be signed before you sign the agency agreement with the buyer's agent. And there's also a technicality here, because if the sales agent refers you as a buyer and they don't have an agency agreement with you because you're a buyer, not a vendor, they don't have to declare anything, and they're the ones receiving the payment. So it's messy. And in my business, well, we there's only certain circumstances where we do actually do a referral fee, but we certainly don't do them with sales agents, and we're very, very, very clear on where we do, and we're very upfront with that. And I think you have to. It's one of the questions to ask. I want to know before I sign an agency agreement if there are any referral fees or commissions being paid to anybody that has either referred me to you or you be referring to me. I want to know up front. I don't care what the legislation is in your state or territory. I want to know before I sign. And I'm not saying I won't sign. I just want to know. I think it's asking for transparency is really important.
Absolutely. And transparency, of course, is what it really is all about. We're not saying don't use buyer's agents, but you need to understand the rules of the road, as it were, and make sure that you're not actually sort of swept up. Now, it's interesting. Cookie asked this question in the chat here, which I'll put up there. Are there any protections for the buyer against dodgy buyer's agents? For example, agents wanting a payment. It's not really regulated, is it?
No, not really. Not well enough. That's for sure. So technically, yes, you could sue them. But then you got to prove it, and who wants to have that around your neck? The other thing too is that, like, this is the thing. I often say, well, go and talk to a sales agent and ask them for the good buyers agents in their area. But before you listen to anything they say, ask them, are they getting a kickback from those buyers agents for referring them? So if they're not, then you might actually take what they say as, reputable. But if they are, then you disregard everything they say, because they're only going to refer to you the people that will pay them a referral fee. The reason it's important to talk to sales agents, though, is because sales agents increasingly are very negative about buyers agents. And it's not because buyers agents make their job harder. It's actually because they see the shit job that's been done. They see how many of them bend over and pay money unnecessarily. And they see, how many of them line up to take their shit. Can I say that? Their shit off-market properties that they know that these buyers agents have pitched to their clients, I get you access to off markets. And then they know they've got this great little deal flow happening because they can ferry all these crap off markets to these buyers agents that are not critical, but have told their clients to expect all these off markets. So it's sort of a perfect storm for the client to get hoodwinked. And the client has to educate themselves so that they don't get hoodwinked.
Yes, and some of the things that I always think about is making sure that you get stuff in writing rather than actually just verbal, right? So there's a lot of examples that I've seen where effectively people were told one thing, but actually there's no evidence that that's what they were told. So, either they misheard, or maybe they were told that and misunderstood, or maybe they were lied to. You don't know. So it's important that we've actually got some process and some documentation. And again, it all sounds as though, it's just more pain. But no, this is critical pain, because if you don't actually take the steps on the way through the journey, you can often end up in a very difficult situation, and then you've got no real recourse at all.
Well, yes. And in fact, you put your questions in writing. If they refuse to answer them in writing, that's a warning sign, isn't it? And look, I think that a buyer's agent that is upfront and willing to answer all these questions and document that, that's a good sign, right? Someone's shirking, they're dodging, they won't put anything in writing, then obviously that's a real issue. But I do feel for consumers, because there's a lot of buyer's agents out there that are very good at marketing, they're very good at their pitch, as I said, but you've really got to look beyond that. You've got to look for the experience and the depth of experience, and you've got to look for track record. And my big recommendation is that if somebody has not been doing the buyer's agent's job for 10 years at least, then I would not give them my money, because they need to have been through complete cycles for starters. There's a lot of things that they need to have experienced, and this is not a job that you pick up quickly.
Absolutely. And it's also important that people are current, right? Because the markets are moving, the dynamics in the markets are moving. And one of the things that I think quite often are missed is the zoning and rezoning of areas, and the implications of that. Particularly now with the 18-story buildings being promised in certain areas around certain railway stations in and around Sydney, for example. So the question is the buyer's agent up to speed with some of this stuff? And quite often, again, what I find is that the information that they have actually provided is old, it's
Yep.
partial, and it can actually deceive rather than actually assist in the decision-making process. Now, you can to yourself, you can go and look at the planning and everything else, but people find that quite daunting. And I'm fascinated because my one-to-one conversations, I do a detailed analysis of a particular suburb, and I go in and look at the planning rules and the zoning rules, and I look at the flood and the fire and all those things and all the other trends. Information is out there, but it's not easy to get hold of, and so many people end up making property decisions, financial decisions, on a very narrow basis of information. And I'm afraid that the buyer's agents are often in the same boat.
Well, that's exactly right. That's why it's really quite poignant that you've used the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where you get given the answer, but you haven't been given the question. And so if you don't know the questions to ask, you are going to not get the answers that you need. You're not going to get the information. You're not going to be making decisions with your eyes wide open.
And Edwin from Ribbon Property, who's on my show quite frequently, said mortgage brokers and financial planners should be mandatory to disclose and be looked at with greater scrutiny. Yeah, the mandatory disclosure question, I mean, it isn't really clear, is it?
Look, I can't speak to their disclosure requirements. My understanding is that they do have disclosure requirements, but whether they follow through on those or not is it's the policing of that, if you want to say that. And certainly, as I said, on the real estate agent side of things, it's mandatory to disclose. So certainly in New South Wales and in most jurisdictions, it is mandatory to make these disclosures, but it's how, when, and what little loopholes are being used to not disclose. And in many cases, there's just a lack of awareness that there is a requirement to disclose.
Absolutely. And just on that, you said that there are state rules and regs. I mean, are there differences across the states, or is it pretty generic? Yeah.
No, there are differences. Yeah.
Right. So that adds another level of complication, right? Particularly if you're in one state and you're thinking of looking at the property in another state. And quite often people will do that because, if I'm in Melbourne, I want to buy in Brisbane, you're more perhaps likely to reach for a buyer's agent in Brisbane, thinking they'll know the area, but you may not know or understand what the rules and regs are in Brisbane for buyer's agents. So how do people find out what the rules are?
Well, I think probably the best place to go is to the Office of Fair Trading or Consumer Affairs or whatever the equivalent is in the state or territory in which you want to buy, and go in there and have a look at what the rules are that govern real estate agents and buyers agents. It's typically the same because they haven't really worked out there's a difference. And there are disclosure rules in every state and territory, and you could just go and search for that to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's worth, I think, underscoring. It is not simple because buyer's agents are sort of wrapped in with real estate agents predominantly and the rules and regs, but it's not clear. And so this whole area of obligation and disclosure is, I think, extremely complicated, unclear.
Yep.
And frankly, people just go around them, quite often as well.
Yeah.
Now, Leo asked this question, which is sort of the other side of it. How do buyer's agents' fees work? If the fee is percentage, then wouldn't they get a higher fee for a higher price, hence not necessarily getting the best price? How does that part of it work?
Yeah, look, it still blows our mind that some buyer's agents will insist on this sort of other side of the real estate coin because sales agents charge a percentage. They think that they should charge a percentage too. That does blow my mind. It doesn't make sense to me because it is counterintuitive, right? As a buyer's agent, I'm meant to be getting the property for you at the best price. So therefore, how does that work if you pay me more, if I pay more on your behalf? So I know in my business, we charge a fixed fee. And I know many other buyers agencies that also charge a fixed fee. Some will sort of go hybrid, which does my heading. They say, oh, no, we charge 2%, but we'll fix it. So it's like,
what?
So they go, oh, well, you think you're going to spend 2 million. So, like you let's fix it at 2 million. And then it doesn't matter what you spend, that's your fee. I still think that the percentage fee is a very lazy way to set your fees in buyer's agency, because we should be, I should say, much more consultative than we are transactional. Sales agents are transactional. They will give lots of advice along the way. Of course, they have to, but they are transactional in their nature. A good buyer's agent should not be transactional. Sadly, too many are. And that is a weird fee model, in my view, to charge a percentage. So I totally agree with the questioner.
Absolutely. And I've seen a few examples where, the fee is a percentage, and of course they push the price up and up. And of course, hang on, you're making more money as a result. That can't be right.
Well, here's the thing, though, it's quite common that a buyer would come to us, and so we have a very rigorous onboarding process, and we really front end the education with clients so that they're very clear on what the possibilities for their search are before we commence that search, right? There's a lot of buyers agents don't typically do that. And a lot of buyers will come along thinking that, look, I think I want to spend, say, $2 million on a property. That's a budget that feels good for me. And then when the search sort of progresses, they realize that they need a bit more money. Now, not everyone can go and get more money. Some people can. And then they go and get more money. And obviously the buyer's agent is going to encourage them to, if they've got a percentage fee, to go and access more borrowing and then go into a different price bracket. Now, sometimes that is necessary because people do come to us with an unrealistic expectation of what they're going to get for their money. And we need to show them, the compromises they need to make. They need to make compromise in terms of the property itself, or they need to make compromise in terms of location, or they need more money to get what they want. So that's a very legitimate part of the advice process that we go through, but it's structured and it's evidence-based, right? It's not just, I can't find what you want, so you're going to have to get more money. But there is that sort of pressure that can happen, with buyer's agents that they are not particularly skilled at onboarding and educating their clients. And then the client end up paying a lot more than they anticipated because their budget was never right in the first place. And it's percentage based, and so their fee goes up every time that they have to adjust their budget.
Yeah, absolutely. Cookie asked another question, which I think is quite relevant, which is, have you seen the site inspections that's on YouTube? That's a guy goes around and kicks the tires on properties and shows all the defects. How many buyer's agents would actually be looking for defects while viewing properties? And you made the point earlier on, they might not even get out of their chair, right? I'm
mortified at the amount of buyer's agents that do not inspect. Now, local specialists will inspect, all right? But buyer's agents who are buying sight unseen in jurisdictions away from where the data-driven buyer's agents, 99% of them, a very high percentage of them, do not inspect properties. So you're absolutely right. They have no idea. But even when, in my team, like all of my team, each of us have got over 20 years experience. So we've been seeing properties, for years, right? So, and we also have made a point of going through with building inspections at the end of their inspection so that they can educate us and show us common issues with properties, things to look out for. And that is something that everybody in my team has done over many, many years. And so we can walk through a property and we can heads up about a number of things. But, I've seen new buyer's agents that they don't notice. They get completely subdued by the new paint, the fresh paint, the styling and all the rest of it. There was one particular property I remember a couple of months back, and a client of ours really loved the look of it. Right, it was a pretty little weatherboard, and it was in the inner west. I won't say exactly where. It was pretty little weatherboard, and this particular house is on a decent block of land. It was quite a regular size block of land as well, regular shaped and everything. There was nothing typically wrong with it, but I thought to myself, I've been in this area for selling and buying real estate for 25 years, and that property has transacted a few times over that period of time. And each time you think somebody's going to turn this into a family home, surely. It's a tiny little house on this block. And, it hasn't been turned into a family home because the cost to do what is needed is prohibitive because of other restrictions with the particular property. It's in a conservation area. It's right on the ground. It's weatherboard. So you're going to be inheriting these problems which you can't really fix because you can't change a facade and sort of the front, say, two to four rooms in this house. And it's obviously posed such a problem for each of the previous owners that they've never gone ahead and done any of this work, that really the property's it's underutilized it's undersized for the area. But it was swarming with buyers agents, and I'm like, I said to our client, we're not buying this for you. We can't, because I know that I'm looking at it and, with fresh eyes. I haven't seen it for a few years, but, I look at it, no, nothing's been done to it. And I know why nothing's been done. And all these other buyers agents who have not been around long enough to know this, they just, they're all excited about it. From my understanding, one of them put it for their client, and the idea was that they're going to turn it into their family home. So good for them. Maybe they'll go and suck it up and pay the money, but it's not the best option for that type of client.
Absolutely. And just going back to, I put it up a little while ago, but I was putting it up again because I thought it was quite funny. Edwin said, most buyers agents don't know the difference between a roof tile and a floor tile, even if it smacked them on the head. Most are just handlifters at the auctions, which is some truth that I feel.
Well, there is, and it's mortifying. I've been at auctions and I've watched some buyers in action, and some buyers agents, I should say, in action. And I've really, it does sicken me, and it really does bother me. But those clients are paying them to be worse off.
And that's the point. That's the point. So, you might well, with good intention, think I'm getting professional help with my property purchase. So it should be beneficial to me to actually engage a buyer's agent. But unfortunately, so often they end up with a worse outcome than if they never went there in the first place, which is ridiculously, stupidly bad.
I know. I've seen some mortifying stuff. And, and I speak to many, many sales agents and auctioneers who tell me story after story after story of what they see. So it's not just me going, oh, don't go with any of my competitors. This is widespread, a lack of, not just a lack of experience and expertise, but a lack of a recognition that they need that expertise. They're just so gung-ho. It's shocking.
Well, you put up a case study, which I'd like you just to sort of walk us through a little bit. I should put the slide up now because this is a really interesting story. And again, it just shows you what can go wrong.
So this was in the AFR May, actually. And so this was the, backstory of a sale. It was in Mildura. And so the agent was, there's a number of quotes in there from this agent saying things like, well, they expected it was probably going to be the early to mid 300s. But then the buyer's agents came out of the woodwork and they upped the price, right? They put it online, and within an hour they had their first offer from someone that has not even inspected the property. It was a buyer's agent, is my understanding on that one. So they ended up having 20 offers, I think it is, 19 of which were, there was one local offer, so 20 offers. One of them was made by a local, 19 were made by out-of-towners, investors, and 17 of those 19 were using buyer's agents. So you have got people engaging a buyer's agent thinking that they want to buy in the next hotspot, right? These are, and it's quoted in here that, a video inspection was good enough for these agents. You've got them pushing the price up a significant amount of money, roughly 20% higher than it should have been. You've got them fighting with each other, outpacing locals, because long-term locals are what will underpin this property market, not these investors. So they're pushing prices up into an, and perhaps they're at the beginning of this curve and it'll go for a run and these people all make instant equity uplift and all the rest of it. But for the long term, that is not a place that people should be investing in. And they definitely should not be investing there once all the data points to these areas and the buyer's agents start flooding in, because this is the sort of thing that happens. So, and the buyer's agents' clients will be none the wiser.
Yeah, and that's the point, right? So you actually don't know what's going on below the waterline. And
this is just one example. It just happened to be published. Like, I've heard so many stories like this in different regional towns in particular. Yeah. And I've even heard them happen in Melbourne, because it's popular at the moment, because Melbourne's had a bad run, that you got these borderless buyers agents doing the same thing in Melbourne, for God's sake. So there is plenty of local buyers agents in Melbourne. Plenty. Use them, please.
Now, Edwin makes the point again that most buyers and buyers agents just rely on the before you bid inspection reports, which is suicidal. And, I quite often focus on this. Remember that they are marketing documents paid for by the vendor with the purpose of telling as little as possible rather than anything useful.
There is a particular inspector that a lot of agents I know use, and we will not rely on an inspection done by that particular inspector, and we haven't not done for years. In fact, we would never rely on the agent's report anyway, unless it was actually done by an inspector that we would use ourselves, and we would talk to that inspector and make sure that that it was a thorough report. But this particular inspector, there was one particular property that I was looking at for a client, and I just said to the client, we're not even going to look at that report that the agent's providing. We're going to get an independent report. So we got an independent report, and it just happened to be done by the same franchise. So it was another franchisee of the same building inspection franchise. And my client had downloaded the agent's report. And then when she got the one that we'd ordered, she put them side by side and say, you'll never believe this, right? And one of the things that our inspector said was that the two bathrooms, the waterproofing had failed in both bathrooms. Downstairs, it had rotten through the floor, and really it was urgently needed to be replaced. Both floors urgently needed to be replaced. And he estimated a cost of around about $20,000 per floor. And because the whole bathroom needed to be done. So that was his estimate. So we're looking at about 40 grand that needed to be thrown at this property fairly urgently. And so when we looked in the other report, it said could not get access under the floor. I've been in the property with this same inspector, the one that we won't use, and I'd said to him, and he was inspecting he was doing an inspection. I went through early with the agent, and I'm standing on the trapdoor, all right? And I said, so what's the subfloor look like? And he goes, oh, couldn't get under there. And I said, what, you couldn't open this trapdoor that I'm standing on? Yeah. He wouldn't go through a manhole into the roof, and he didn't go in the roof for this particular property either, and said there was no evidence of termite activity, and yet, our inspector had been up there and photographed it, nothing current, but it had termite activity, and so people, and I did a screenshot side by side of these reports because they're in exactly the same format. And, one was a lot longer than the other. And I sent it off to the agent and I said, you know what, I know that you think that the building inspector's indemnity is going to cover you here, but this is marketing material and it's false and misleading. So, and I don't normally get so aggro with agents, but I did on this occasion. And so I made them, they went off and got him to do a proper report, and they had to disclose that to all the other buyers.
Yes. Well, the fact is that those reports, which, by the way, a lot of prospective purchasers rely on,
they do.
They need to understand their marketing documents. They are very superficial, very quickly done. And I actually I got a report done when I sold my Thurul house, and the agent suggested that we get one of these done. The chat there was in the property about 15 minutes. And in 15 minutes, he'd written, when I say written, what he'd done was actually pick preset sentences from a little application. He's tapped it and put it in, right? So basically, it's not written. It's just generated, right? And he didn't even look in some of the cupboards. Because he said, well, they're too full of stuff, so I'm not going to look in there. I'm not going to look in the loft space, etc., etc. And I'm thinking, well, I'm doing this because the agent has basically said you need this to be able to actually, put the property onto the market. But I said, well, hang on a moment. Is this really adding any value at all? It's probably actually being deceptive rather than anything else. But, you sort of go along with the story because that's what the agent who's actually in charge of selling the property suggests you should do. But
I do the same thing if I was selling. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, it's part of the marketing campaign. That's how he positioned it, right?
Yeah.
And I thought that's very interesting. It's part of the marketing campaign. Now, if I'm on the other side, if I'm a buyer's agent, I should be the objective, independent one and want to actually, kick the tires and look under the under the carpets and everything else, right? Because that surely is part of the obligation that a buyer's agent had if they're doing their job.
Well, and this is the thing. A buyer's agent, one of the essential skills or characteristics of a buyer's agent has to be critical thinking. But a lot don't have that. A lot have, love, they're starry eyed about, I love property. I love looking at property. It's just like, but can you tell a good one? Did you even know that some are not good? A lot of it just seems to just totally go over their heads. So, for my part, we spend a lot of time. One of the other questions that you want to ask a buyer's agent is really, how many do you walk away from? How often do you recommend to your client not purchase? And particularly if you've already done a lot of due diligence or a lot of work on that property, and some of them don't do any due diligence, by the way, but particularly if you've got a lot of hours sunk into evaluating the property, and then you discover something that really is a deal breaker. It's a real metal of a good advisor that will turn around to the client and say, I'm going to change my recommendation here. I just found out something that I can't in all good conscience let you go and buy this without knowing this. And my recommendation now is that you don't buy it. Some clients will still go ahead and buy, but they got their eyes wide open. Most are happy and very thankful that we found out that deal breaker and saved them. But that's what you want. You want that in a buyer's agent, and you want examples. Tell me stories. Tell me, not stories, but tell me examples. Give me case studies of when you've changed your recommendation on a property and why. What did you find out?
No, I think that's right. And we've just touched on it briefly, but just to say, there is actually a tool which you have available, which I think we might want to talk about now, right? Because there are some specific questions that really are required. And I'll put that up, and then perhaps you can talk to it.
Sure. Yeah. So I've got, I put this together because it horrifies me that people are buying or choosing a buyer's agent without really knowing. So you can get this. You don't even have to give me your email address. You literally just go in there and you can get it. And so I want, these are questions that you can really start to dig deep and understand, the level of experience, their values, what they're going to do for you, how they're going to add value to you. And even in this document that you get, I even include recommendations in terms of what you should be listening for and why I recommend that you ask these questions as well, because I want to give you insights into what really is going on in the in the background. So a well-informed client will choose a buyer's agent, has a much better chance choosing a buyer's agent that is going to do for you what you think and hope that they're going to do for you. So that's what this is. It's about 2 pages. Hang on, I'm scrolling through. I've got it here. 4 pages. It is 4 pages. It's fairly big type, so it's not lots of small type. But do you want me to run through some of the questions?
Yeah, why not? I think it would be really helpful to give people a bit of an insight. Yeah, the link is there if people want to make a note of it. But yeah, go on.
Yeah. Look, the first question is, how long have you been a buyer's agent? I mentioned before that I believe you really don't go with anyone who's got less than 10 years experience, or at least you want them working very closely with a mentor who has more than 10 years experience. It's one reason I actually put together the Buyer's Agent Mentor program, because there are it's actually quite difficult to get. There's a lot of one-man bands and micro businesses out there. So I provide a support for smaller businesses that have been around less time so that they're actually getting guidance and mentoring by someone who's more experienced. But the problem is that most of them are not mentored and are not in getting any guidance. So you really want someone who's been around the trap. So that's why I say at least 10 years. And one of the things I like to know too is, have they ever been a sales agent, and for how long? Because people who typically have previously been in the selling role before their 10 years as a buyer's agent, that is, they've got a greater insight into the purchase process as well. And they also understand the types of properties that might be duds, because they've tried to sell duds. And when you've tried to sell a dud, you know how to avoid buying a dud, let me tell you. I also want to know who they work for before they're in the current role. Like if they're working for themselves now, have they ever worked for anyone else, or if they only ever worked for themselves? And if they've got no actual real estate experience, i.e. they've never been a sales agent and they've only been a buyer's agent working for themselves, I don't know. I wouldn't go there. I want to know what qualifications that they've undertaken. Now, yes, they've got to do the minimum, but it's they've got to do their Cert 4 and blah, blah, blah. But what I want to do, I'll just give you the heads up. Queensland is the quickest state for anyone to get their license, right? I want to know how they got their license. Did they get it in the state in which they are buying? So if they, for example, in New South Wales and Victoria, it takes a lot longer to get a license than it does in Queensland. And you have to have work experience as well before you can get your Class 1 license or the license that allows you to run a business. Whereas Queensland, you don't. The course is shorter and there's no experience required. So what a lot of people do, they do this backdoor way of getting their license. They go to Queensland where it's quicker, and then they go and apply for mutual recognition, and that's going to be automatic as of July 1 in most states, my understanding. They've taken a shortcut. So if they're going to take a shortcut to get their license, you just got to be very wary of what type of person would do that, I also want to know what area and property type do they specialize in. If they say, I buy everywhere, well, I'm sorry, that's not good enough, because every area has this, tricks. There's certain types of properties that are popular in an area, unpopular in an area. There's certain pockets of an area that you should avoid like the plague, and so you really want to understand that your buyer's agent you're going to choose is a specialist. They want to be able to clearly articulate the types of property that they buy, the type of people that they work with, and the area in which they buy. Otherwise, I really doubt they can add a huge amount of value to your search because they're not going to be specialist enough. Another question I mentioned earlier, will you personally inspect the properties you recommend? And it's important that they don't shirk this and go, oh, yeah, I have someone on the ground. No, I want to know, do you personally inspect them? Ask for examples of what properties they've bought for clients in the last 3 months. What you want to do is see evidence that they're active in the area in which you want to buy, right? And check those links, look at the properties, and that'll give you an insight into the types of properties that they recommend. Ask them, what process do you go through prior to recommending a property for a client or to a client? Because you want to really pick up on how discerning they are. Do they simply, recommend a property because it ticks the boxes or because it's off market? Or are they applying filters to make sure that they're protecting you from buying a substandard property? Or are they offering you a property and saying, oh, well, you got till tomorrow to accept it, otherwise I'm going to pass it on to a next client on the list. This is a pressured sales tactic that we do not endorse, and it happens all the time, and it's shocking. And a lot of those borderless buyers agents that don't get out of their desk and don't inspect properties, they employ that sort of tactic. They're probably buying properties in Mildura at 20% over market value, competing with other buyers agents doing exactly the same thing, and they're using FOMO and social proof to make you pressured into grabbing it because it's this opportunity that's not going to be around for much longer. It's all bullshit. I want to know what due diligence. Do you want me to keep going?
I was going to say let's just pause there because I got a few questions, and depending on how we go, we might
go on a rant.
No. But the point, just reflecting on what you've said, those are a set of deep and very penetrating questions, right? Which I reckon most people would not even think about asking, which suggests to me that a lot of people who are thinking about engaging with a buyer's agent don't even know where to start. So that download is a really, really important tool. As you say, there's no obligation, it's just there and available if you're interested in grabbing the link. Now, Jump for Joy asked about the commission. Is it only payable on a successful purchase from buyer's agent?
Yeah. Now, this is a really good question.
Yeah.
All right. Because, and this is something I have a real issue with, buyer's agents using the term success fee. Right? Because a success fee, what's your definition of success? Right? I buy quickly and I overpay. Like, is that success?
Success for who?
Yeah. And so I think that and this is something that I know a lot of people are wary about. They're wary about paying a buyer's agent like an engagement fee and say a monthly retainer, for example, because they're thinking, well, I haven't got anything for my money, right? But we are a professional service. If you do this job well, we are a professional service. And so we charge like professional service, right? And so the way we charge, we'll quote you a total fixed fee. and there's an engagement fee, and then we charge you a monthly retainer, and then on exchange of contracts, because that's how it works in New South Wales, it's exchange of contracts is when it's gone unconditional. That's at the point where the balance of the fee is payable. And we're very careful in our business about not using that word success fee. That's just because when we've finally delivered the ultimate, that's the objective of the service, right? Is to find you the right property at the right price. So once that has been achieved, we charge the balance of our fee. But for the whole period of time, we're working for you, we're advising you, we're guiding you, we're kissing a lot of frogs, we're telling you not to go for things that we'd started inspecting, we're hosing you down if you're getting impatient because the right one hasn't come up or everything's shit. If it's a hot market and it's really competitive and we're trying to make sure that we're working on getting your pricing right to make sure you got the opportunity to buy in this market but without overpaying. All of that stuff takes a lot of work, a lot of commitment. And if you're only paying at the end of it, you're encouraging that buyer's agent to get you off the books quickly. So you've got to be thinking with any sort of payment, it's what's the incentive? What's behavior are you incentivizing? So whereas some people think, well, you haven't done anything, you haven't achieved what I want, so therefore I'm not going to pay you until you buy. So anyway, two different ways of looking at that. But, I've just given you what I think, which is that we are advising you and we're guiding you, and I want to take that pressure off us having to feel like we have to get that final payment from a business perspective. You want to make sure that everything is set up to make sure that the client is getting what they need.
Yeah, well, I've always thought that the real role is a counsellor and a coach.
Yeah.
Right? Rather than actually a deal maker. Now, you have some deal making on the way.
You've got to be able to do deals too.
That's true. But the point there is, and I've seen this in some of my one-to-one conversations where, for example, you've got two people in a family who have different views about what to buy, right? Or different opinions about what a good property is versus not, those things need to be ironed out as part of the process.
They do. We call it property therapy, and we often have couples that come to us, and sometimes that's the reason they ultimately use a buyer's agent is because they actually can't negotiate with each other. So they need a third person. In fact, one of my clients many years ago, she said to me, Veronica, you are the threesome that is good for our marriage. So
excellent.
I love
all
that
part
line.
of the service.
Yes.
Very good. Now, Cookie also asked, and I think this is one of particular interest to me, how many buyer's agents would have asbestos awareness?
Yeah, not enough. Not enough. Not enough.
Yeah, and Drew actually put a comment up saying, think about the old roof corrugations, the old electrical switchboards, old carpets, underlays. There are 26 types of asbestos in typical older houses. And, I've always said, think asbestos, assume asbestos is there in older properties. And by the way, older properties can be up to the 90s.
Look, and it's not just the property you're buying, it could be the property next door.
Yep.
And so there was a house that I looked at for a client a couple of years back, and I went through with them, and we're walking through, and they really like this house, right? And we get out to the back, and I've looked at the house next door, and I said, you're not buying this house. Why? And I'm like, look at that. That is, I don't even want to stand out here in the breeze because it was all it's all friable asbestos. It was basically in really bad condition, and it was all asbestos sheeting. I could just, it's old enough to know, and in terrible condition. None of it was painted. It had been like that for years, clearly. It was all cracked and broken, and I just went, you just don't want to live next to this. As I said, I'm actually not even going to stand out here any longer talking to you. We're going inside, and I'm leaving. I don't want to be here. And so, but, my understanding is that a buyer's agent bought it for their client.
Yes. Well, unfortunately, the asbestos story continues. I continue to lobby and continue to advise individuals about it. And the most interesting story I've had in the last month or so on asbestos is somebody was looking at a property, and there was linoleum. I can't say it. Lino.
Lino, yeah.
on the floor. And I said to them, you want to get that looked at because a lot of the lino type products actually have asbestos wedded wedded through it, welded through it. And so they got it tested as part of the process of due diligence. They were looking at this property. And the readings of asbestos dust that were actually in the floor covering was astronomical. And the previous owner, who had actually let the property out for 5 years, was mortified because they'd never realized that this investment property had lino on the floor and it was basically spreading asbestos dust all over the place. And that's just an object lesson, right? So it's not just the obvious thing like the roof, it's in lots of other places too. And unfortunately, as more properties now are often bought and then knocked down and then rebuilt, you can actually have asbestos in the old one that you're knocking down, and that can still be the problem because you can still throw the dust all over the place. And that means that it's not necessarily dust-free. And I'm afraid the numbers of people who are going down with mesothelioma and other asbestos-related disease are continuing to rise rather than not, which is scary stuff. So this is a really, I'll get off my high horse now, but this is a big deal.
It is a big deal, and I agree with you. And I think that it's buyer's agent, they need to make themselves aware of anything that could be a deal breaker. And this is the problem is you've got to know what you don't know, and often they haven't even gone there. Like they just wouldn't have a clue. A lot of them.
So in the ideal world, if you had a sort of a perfect ability to click your fingers and make it happen, what would you change, and what would your ideal buyer's agent be, other than saying yourself?
Yeah, I'd be in charge. There'd be a national oversight for starters, and there'd be a recognition that the buyer's agent need to have a much higher level of skill and knowledge than a sales agent. And so there would be a specialist. To be honest, there should be less of us because there are far too many running around. And I think it should be university qualification personally. But, failing that, a graduate diploma, and there should be a specific training on buyer's agency that would cover things like investment fundamentals, cover things like how to read data properly, right? Like you actually need to have some good statistical analysis ability, would cover things like due diligence, would cover things also like the psychology of working with clients, because also the psychology of working with agents, negotiation skills. There's a whole bunch of things. I've got like 10 things that I don't have the top of my head here, but like I've listed out 10 things that are relatively off the top of my head. I could probably get them all out without using my notes, but there's 10 areas at least that are not covered in the current training. And so I would make it mandatory that there was like apprenticeships, if you want to call it that, or mentoring programs that was mandatory, that the mentees or the mentors actually have to qualify to take on mentees. I would make it a hell of a lot more difficult because, as I said before, consumers bumbling along on their own will do a better job than paying some of these buyer's agents. And I think that's got to stop. So that's how I change things.
Right. And I think the idea of national harmonisation for me is a really important one, right? Because of this issue of interstate playing, and the number of times that I've heard of people actually relying on interstate to pass the parcel and actually not getting the right answer. It's really,
probably
really
outlaw
important.
Being able to buy without inspecting.
Yeah. And in fact, D-Man asked, what percentage of buyers agents work from home without physically seeing a property? And the answer is too many.
High.
Way too many. And, without seeing the property, you don't stand a chance, really.
It's not just home. A lot of these, the thing is that the only type of buyer's agency that you can really scale is a borderless buyer's agency, where they're basically marketing to investors en masse. They've got their sales engine, their marketing engine going like crazy. They have buyer's agents all working in offices. Very few of these, a tiny percentages of these larger businesses that do borderless buying have boots on the ground. Most of them have teams of buyer's agents that are remote. They're buying all online, effectively all, via WhatsApp. And that is they're not working from home, these ones. Some are. There's some smaller ones that work from home, but the bigger marketing machines, they're the ones doing more damage.
Absolutely, and that's the point. I keep coming back to damage. They are creating real mayhem. They're actually destroying people's lives in the process, and it's not right, not fair, and needs to be changed. Cookie Boy made the point. I'd be asking for the agent to do videos of the properties that they've attended, which is an interesting observation.
Yeah, and you want them to talk on that video.
Yes.
Because I've seen videos that have come from these agents. The agents have filmed it, and there's no voice.
Yes, absolutely right. And again,
so you get my voice if I go and inspect a property. Mind you, my team run the clients. I've got a very small team, a very bespoke team, and they look after the clients. But I still go out and inspect properties and talk to clients about properties, and I'm aware of every property that we buy, even though I'm not actually running, managing the search per se. And my clients think it's hilarious when I do a video because I'm talking about everything I see. I point out, I zoom in a corner, like, what the hell they do this for? And so it's like a stream of consciousness walking through a house. And my team are like that too, because they all see the same sort of things, right? And you want that. You want some value add. You want some insights in that video. You want to be feeling like they haven't just walked in and just, moved their phone around. You want to understand what they should and what they're pointing out to you, So it's very important.
Absolutely. And of course, the technology allows that. Trouble is now AI can probably generate stuff, probably. Right? So, actually, Deeman also said provide an explanation of rent seeking to the uninitiated. What it simply means, people who are basically able to exploit the system and process for their own ends, rather than actually the benefit of those who actually were initially, taking the service. And I'm afraid that rent seeking is a big, big, big issue across the whole of the property sector. I
haven't heard that term. What is it?
Oh, rent seeking. Well, it is basically what I say. It's basically people who actually are milking the system, playing the game, making money on their own behalf on the way through. It's worth understanding it, because what it basically means is that there is a set of objectives that they have, which are different from your objectives. Right?
Yes,
so,
of course.
So your objective is, I want to find a house and I want to pay a reasonable price for it, and I want some help. If you have somebody as a buyer's agent and they're basically just saying, well, I'm out to maximize the amount of money I can make from that person, I don't really care about whether they actually end up with a good decision or a bad decision. I'm not interested in that. All I want to see is my fee being paid, and maybe I'll get a backhander from the agent on the way or the developer on the way. So they have a different set of agendas. So they're effectively seeking, a completely different set of outcomes.
Yep.
And that means that you have a complete conflict. And it's that conflict of outcomes and conflict of interest, which is the real issue. And as I pull back, the conflict of interest issue is the root cause problem here, that you have people who are motivated on a different basis to the one you think you're paying them to be involved on.
Yes, they're not motivated for your greater financial future. And another thing that really does bother me, particularly with a lot of these larger buyers agencies that buy, in multiple jurisdictions, and that they were all in Perth, right? And they're all in Toowoomba, and they're all in Ballarat. I mean, now they're all in Mildura apparently. So, is that what they do? They do a property plan, because too many people think quantity over quality. There's too many people that are starry-eyed about owning 6 or 8 properties, right? Or whatever. So they have this plan that's like, you buy the first one, then you get the instant equity uplift, and then you can basically access more borrowing and go and buy again. And because isn't investing great? This is wonderful. This is major sugar hit because they buy in rising markets. And they're, and you're thinking this investing is friggin' awesome. How much money am I making? It's like, this is just like money for jam. Please do it again. Give me another one. I want more of that, right? And so they'll basically keep going until you max your borrowing capacity. You've maxed, every skerrick of instant equity that you've gathered in these rising markets that God knows what's going to happen in long term. It just reminds me of the mining town boom back in 2010, 2012. It really smacks of that, where you've got so you had all these people that were piling into mining towns because basically they were getting ridiculous capital growth, ridiculous rental yields, and prices was just doing that, right? And then the merry-go-round stopped. And you've got people now, 15 years later, that where they own a property, they're total mortgage prisoners. The property might be owned in many of these places. The properties are worth like a third of what they paid. You know, they're never getting out of there. That's assuming they haven't had to file for bankruptcy. So was it you that told me that there was somebody I spoke to, or some I heard a story about somebody had to pay somebody to live in the house in this particular mining town because so it didn't get
Yep.
vandalized. Was it you that told me that story?
Well, I'm not sure I've
Have you
told
heard
you it,
that?
but yeah, absolutely, I have. Yeah, several times.
Jesus.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah,
wow,
yeah,
talk
yeah, yeah,
about
yeah,
hell.
yeah,
And all you were doing was trying to set up yourself financially for the
yeah,
future.
yeah.
That's the sort of thing that is, we're going to be hearing those stories in maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years.
Absolutely. Well, the things that I've come across recently are, I've got a property. It's now worth a lot less than when I bought it. It's never going to recover. What do I do? Do I try and sell it as a loss and take the capital hit? Do I try and have somebody live in it because I can't live in it anymore? But then the costs of managing the property. I mean, they've got themselves into this horrendous situation simply because of not actually having eyes open on the way in. And
Mm.
unfortunately, I feel that more and more people are walking into these bear traps. And then I have to say that a lot of the industry participants, and I will put real estate agents and I will put buyer's agents on the list, are often those facilitating that to the point where they are part of the problem and they're actually trapping people in properties. And that, for me, is a very criminal outcome, but it's not criminal. See
No,
what I
and
mean?
this is what a lot of these buyers agents are currently doing.
Yeah.
And the sales agents, not so much. You know, the sales agents, they've got a product to sell. If people are stupid enough to pay the price and fight over it, great. I was at a conference last year and I spoke to a fellow he worked in, I think it was Docklands or South Bank or one of those Melbourne areas where there's massive oversupply of apartments. In fact, the pain and gain report, CoreLogic's pain and gain report that came out for the December quarter had inner Melbourne apartments is 37% selling at a loss in that quarter, right? So it's that type of area. And I said to him, oh, how's it going? Like, this must be pretty tough there. He said, oh, I'm having a brilliant year. And I've gone, oh, that's interesting. So the price is rising, people are starting to get their money back. And he went, no, most of my clients are selling at a loss, but they're selling heaps and I'm making my money,
Yeah.
and he had no qualms, didn't bother him at all. He's the sort of person, well, you sort of need someone like that, I guess, if you want to get out of having that type of investment, rabbit ears. But yeah, I mean, because at the end of the day, he's making money, right? But most of his owners aren't. Most of his vendors aren't. But he's not the problem. He's actually providing a solution for those people now to
Yes.
get out of there, right?
Yes.
Assuming he didn't sell them in the first place, but he's not really the problem. So
Yeah, and as with all of these things, when you actually look at it in detail, you can sort of see some of the things that are going on. And people always say to me, well, property prices always go up, don't they? So it's this sort of ultra reliable, except
in
I,
the aggregate, yes.
exactly right. But look at North Ryde units, for example. The highest they were back in were in 2017, and they've dropped considerably since then. And again, I have
Yep.
a number of people that I've worked with who've actually got this really difficult decision. I bought this property, it's dropped in value. Do I hold it and hope, or do I actually just get out and take a hit, or what do I do? Do I try and let it, and all those things? And then you see that the strata fees are rising astronomically, and it means that they just are deeper underwater. Again, I don't want to scare people, but my point is you can make mistakes easily on the property transaction. And so often the surrounding services are actually part of the problem rather than part of the solution, which is why I think this is a really important conversation tonight.
Yeah, yeah. We do, as I mentioned earlier, we do vendor advisory work. We are approached by many people who are wanting to sell a property, and we help people sell property across the country. And a lot of the people that come to us have got these sorts of properties that are very difficult to sell. And so, we assist them to get out of there with the least amount of damage. And choosing an agent and the careful calibration of how you price that, how you market that, it's got to be very carefully calibrated because they're not easy to sell, a lot of these properties. And someone else is going to come along and buy it. Many of them sell for less than they paid. But we talk to them and say you've got to under circumstances, this is not advice for anybody that is in this situation. You do need to get advice, but in many cases there's no point holding on, because you're just going to you're just treading water in your life for how long? Like this particular client we got at the moment, one particular property, she's actually got three, two of which we would class as what we call flops, which mean you want to get out of them. The other one is a flyer. Sorry, not a flyer, a floater. We've got flyers, floaters, and flops, right? Flyers, you should do everything you can to keep a flyer in your portfolio. Flops, you should do everything you can to get rid of them. And a floater will make decisions based on a number of other considerations. But, in this particular situation, he's got two floaters. Sorry, God, I'm getting myself confused here. Two flops that we're helping her to get rid of. And, we've got an offer on one of them, and it's really interesting because the person that has made the offer has been advised by somebody else who's bought one in the building recently. So they've been encouraged by someone else who's made a bad decision. But because what we do and our human biases when we make important decisions is to we have a bias towards justifying those decisions that we've made. And so that makes us the most dangerous we can ever be. If we made a bad property decision and then we try to encourage our friends and family to make the same decision, very similar decision, we're a dangerous weapon.
It's a very good point. Mutual reinforcement often can lead to more pain. Interestingly, Cookie asked this question: how do you find a good buyer's agent if you're looking to buy in regional areas? That's an interesting question.
So, yeah, look, there's more and more buyer's agents in regional areas, actually, we've noticed. And this is a good thing and a bad thing. Some of them might have good buyer's agents there and some of them don't. I mean, I actually encourage people to reach out to me via my website, veronicamorgan.com, if they want to, .com.au, if they want a recommendation to a local specialist buyer's agent, because I know how hard it is to find them. Some areas I don't know anyone, so I would go, just unless you want to move there, don't buy there. Like if you're trying to buy there as an investor and there's not a good buyer's agent who's on the ground, don't buy there. There's lots of other places to invest. But if you want to move there and there's no good buyer's agent on the ground, you might need to go and do a lot of legwork yourself, But there are lots of regional areas where there are good buyer's agents. Ask the same questions of them that, I've got this download you can grab hold of. So the same questions apply.
Thank you for that. And then this question came in: is buying off the plan still popular? Would Veronica have an opinion on its popularity?
Of course, I've got an opinion, and I've got, well, whether it's popular. I don't know if it's popular or not, to be quite frank. I know the governments are going to be wanting to push lots of people to buying off the plan because supply is the solution. Remember, every politician, when asked, is going to tell you that supply is the solution to our housing issues in this country, and in order to assist in that and assist developers to get these buildings out of the ground, off the plan sales are going to be encouraged. There'll be more and more incentives for first home buyers and potentially more tax breaks for investors to, on the proviso that they only buy off the plan. So that is going to fuel popularity. Okay. However, the actual statistics, the data around the performance of properties that have been purchased off the plan is woeful, and in fact is the single most risky segment of the market. So I encourage you not to buy off the plan. That's all I can say.
I would endorse that as well. Again, having looked at this over a number of years and worked with a number of one-to-one conversations, the number of people who have successfully achieved their dream by buying off the plan is a very small proportion of those who actually have got properties that cost more than they thought, with more defects than they thought, that hasn't appreciated in value as they thought it would, not least because there's now another suburb down the road that's new. And of course, people want new rather than secondhand. And then the final point is the elapsed time between when you actually commit and to actually moving in. We're not talking a few weeks here, we're talking months or potentially years. And in that time, the world can change. So to my mind, this is it's a shameful story of government when they're saying we're going to solve the problem, which isn't going to solve the problem, by just encouraging more people to trap themselves into off the plan developments. It is disgusting, it's disgraceful, but unfortunately a lot of people are being fooled by it.
Yep. I think it's disgusting as well. It puts the onus on individuals and often the most vulnerable individuals, because a lot of it is directed at first home buyers, and it's a terrible way to get onto the property ladder. And yes, the odd person can do okay out of it, but that's luck. That's not good management.
Well, it's actually even worse than that, because of course with the 5% deposit, the government is going to be sitting on that sort of additional exposure, and if they're going to end up deeply in debt, I think the government, on their scheme.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting because the government's going to be the one insuring these people. So, maybe things will change there. But look, it's the waves you get of, whenever there's a sort of a market slowdown and then all of a sudden the headlines come out with, a high percentage of off the plan sales, under the valuations falling over on settlement. And as you said, the world can change, but, your borrowing capacity can change, interest rates can change. There's just so many things that can change that mean that you struggle to get the money, but you're prepaid. Like you're not actually buying at today's values. This is the other thing too. Yes. The way that they price them, they're sort of like saying, well, if you buy it today, but you're sort of buying at 2027 prices. And quite often when people are trying to grab all the government incentives to buy off the plan, they're not then comparing with the existing stock that's around, and they're not realizing the value differential. And so it is very dangerous because they're just not even aware of that they're overpaying. And they're also thinking, oh, I've got all this extra time to save up the extra money, and it's like, and in that time you committed to that. And if your circumstances change, you can't go and buy something else, So there's so many reasons why I really strongly encourage people not to do it.
And I use the analogy of when you buy a new car, as soon as you actually drive out of the showroom, the value goes down, right? That is true often with purchases when you finally get in. The first time you go in, the value goes down.
The first time resale of off the plan apartments is phenomenal. I've actually just got a little bit of data here so this was data from Picard that new apartments lost money. This is between 2011 and 2019. So this is I gave you some data from CoreLogic's Pain and Gain report that was recent. That was in the end of last year. If you went and got that report, you will see that Parramatta and Ryde were the next two highest resale at a loss percentage areas. I think if I got that right. But it goes back. This has been going on for a long time. So the new apartments losing money between 2011 and 2019 in Melbourne at that time, 66%, 2/3. In Brisbane, over that same period, it was 48%. That's nearly half. And between a different period, but 2015 and 19 in Sydney, because Sydney's oversupply started a bit later than those two cities, it was 23% at that time. So there's nearly a quarter selling at a lot. That is just, to me, that's just not worth taking the risk because that's the ones that sold. What about the ones that didn't sell? Had they gone on the market, odds are they would have sold at a loss.
Absolutely. And Edwin's just put a breaking news there. New South Wales looking to back developers so they can build the dog boxes they need to save face. And that's exactly, it's a political issue rather than anything else. But, people just need to be really, really cautious. And Veronica, that's been terrific. I'll just tell you that the poll, you might be interested in the results.
Oh, yeah.
So my question was, have you ever used a buyer's agent? 47% never and would never. 43% said no, but might in the future. So there's actually quite a few who say, well, I might in the future. 3% said yes and will do it again. But 7% said yes, but I will never, never again. That tells you quite a lot, I think, about the state of play when it comes to people's perspectives on buyers agents.
Well, your audience as well.
Well, yeah, my audience hopefully is well informed on a lot of these things, so maybe that's
I would
part.
hope so. I would hope so too.
But very
Look,
interesting.
it's a sad indictment. It's interesting that there's a percentage. It was at 43% said that they might. So look, that 43% that said that they might. Download my questions for you, because if you might want to make sure that you make a better choice than the 7% that have and never would again.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's at veronicamorgan.com.au /
And as I
what
said,
to ask a buyer's agent.
yeah, and sorry, I was basically saying, I mean, you'll find that in the resources section of that website, which is just veronicamorgan.com.au. I'm not asking for your email address. You can get it for nothing. I'm not trying to grab your details here. I just want more people to make better decisions.
And MCM says, we listen to Martin at Walk the World. Well, that's good. I mean, my purpose here and Veronica's purpose there is to help people make better decisions, right? And that's what this conversation has been about. Veronica, that's been fantastic. Thank you very much for your time. Obviously, if you want to find out more about Veronica, she gave just a second ago her URL there, and there's lots of information there, and you can also go to see some of the other things. I'll also mention the Elephant in the Room podcast. I was on there quite recently, and we were talking about the python and the elephant and the equity problem, which was a fascinating conversation too. So I enjoyed talking about that.
Yeah, that was great chat, actually, Martin. Thank you very much, Martin. It's always lovely to chat to you and your audience. You've only got 2 people sending you questions. Was it Cookie Man and Edwin?
No, there's quite a few.
Having the rest of them.
Yeah. No, we had a good number on. But the point is that this is a sort of show that gets a lot of repeat playing, because people, quite often realize that they don't know what they need to know, and this is the sort of show that will stand the test of time, because there is such a lot of good information. So thank you very much. Lovely to spend some time with you this evening, and I look forward to doing it again down the track. I'm going to take you offline now, and I'll just close the show. Thank you very much, Veronica.
Thank you very much. See ya.
See ya. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed that. I think really, really important conversation there. Next week, Damien will be back, and we'll be talking about the financial markets and what's happened over the last little while. Ups and downs all over the place, but back to square one again now. So that should be fun. Thank you very much for spending time with us this evening. The doggies are still here. There you go. And looking as though they would never move again, but perhaps they will. And I'll take them out for a walk, I suppose, soon. So thank you very much indeed for spending time with us this evening. Take care. Have a good week. Check out the recorded shows, and check in next Tuesday for another exciting installment of our Tuesday evening discussions. This is Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics signing off. We'll see you next time. Take care.